Last week we started joy, and we looked at, and our question is, as we're kind of going through it, is how do we find joy? What does it mean to have joy, and how do you obtain joy in a world that seems hard to have joy in? I mean, let's face it, it's a tough environment. If we look back when it was written, it was a really tough environment. But it's still tough, you know. It seems the world is in control of everything. And they'll do everything they can to take joy away. And so, but we're told to have joy, and it's a fruit of the Spirit. So how does that work? Last week we looked at, how do we find joy according to last week? We're going to be in Hebrews.
Hebrews.
Anybody remember? Y'all get a pass because y'all
What did you ask?
So last week, when we were looking at how do we find joy, what was the first place we found? We find joy in the gospel. As we're looking at, our focus is on Jesus and what he did, being God, and our focus maintains on him and not on what others are doing or what others are saying, or how we feel about ourselves or we feel about our situation. But we keep focused on God leaving heaven, putting on humanity, being abused by what he created, and in obedience dying on the cross, and we're told with joy. It gives us that picture of our focus being on God's love for us and for others, and us being a part of that message. We can have joy even in circumstances that seem to be joyless. And so we looked at, first place we find joy is when we stay focused on the gospel. Tonight we want to look at another way we find joy, and another way we find joy is through God's discipline. And notice there's a difference in joy and happiness. We talked about that last week, right? What's the difference in joy and happiness?
Happiness is based on your... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Right.
Well, joy is when it's internal. You feel it from the inside. But happiness is just something external, like you get a gift or something like that. That's just external. Seems like
Yeah, very good. Yeah, happiness is an emotion, and so happiness, we can be happy when we're given a gift. We can be happy when we see somebody that we like. That's an emotional response. Joy is not an emotional response. Joy is a perspective. And so we can have joy even when someone isn't treating us right. We can have joy in the midst of knowing that we're being that light. We have joy in the midst of knowing we're helping somebody, even if they don't respond in a way that shows appreciation for that. I think that's probably a good way to think of it, because probably all of us have helped somebody else out, been there for somebody else that maybe didn't want it, or didn't have a appreciative attitude toward it, you know, and yet you still felt joy in the fact that you gave to another, and it didn't matter how they treated you, right? It didn't mean you weren't happy about how they treated you, the emotion of, and you may have said, they should appreciate what I'm doing, but your joy came from a response of perspective and saying, wow, I can help somebody else. I'm not useless. I'm not without purpose in this world. And joy can, so that's the difference in joy and happiness. And so we may not be happy when we're disciplined, but we can have joy in the discipline. And Hebrews talks about that. And so we're in Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12. And we're going to read the first 13 verses tonight. And I think, let's divide it up a little bit. Somebody want to read verses 1 through 3.
Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witness, let us throw everything off that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who is the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart.
Okay, thank you. So if we look at these first 3 verses, we're told it begins with, since we have such a great cloud of witnesses. And when you get this therefore or since or one of those words, you have to ask, well, what's it there for? If you have a therefore, you ask, what is it there for? And so it refers to something that's already been talked about. So you would have to go back and read the chapters before. If we read the chapter before, it gives the Hebrews list of the heroes of the faith. Everybody know what I'm talking about? You've probably read it a million times. You've probably heard sermons on it. But it gives a litany of those that we see in the Bible that have been obedient to God. And we might say, wow, David, or, Abraham, or, the heroes of the faith that we would look back on. And so when he says, therefore, we look back on that. Since we have such a great cloud of witnesses. Now, what does that mean? Because we have such a historical perspective. Doesn't mean they're sitting there looking at us. I don't think they even notice us at all. I mean, I don't see how you could when you're in heaven in the very presence of God. I think it's more because we have such a historical legacy of faith. We have people that have developed the faith. That should cause us to want to live a way that honors that. It's kind of like maybe in your family. Do you have somebody maybe famous for something in your family, and you feel this, well, because of Uncle so-and-so, and there, I think back to my granddad. My granddad was in World War II. He drove an LST in D-Day. And not that he talked about his service much, but I remember part of the reason I went into the military was because I had a legacy from my granddad. He never pushed, he never even pointed that way. And as I was in the military, I would think, well, my granddad served this way. And it then propelled me to serve in a certain way, in a way that would honor the legacy that he left. And probably everybody, it may not be the military, but probably everybody has something like that you can think of in your secular or even in your spiritual life. Because of this pastor that poured into me. Because of this youth group leader that poured into me. Because of this friend that was a believer that poured into me. I want to live in a way that honors what they've poured into me. And so he said, because we have this legacy, because we've had people that have poured into our understanding of the faith, what are we to do?
Throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles.
Okay, so we're to run a race, right? We're to run a race that honors that. And so he uses a race example. And so then how do we run that race? And that's where we get into verse 3. So one of it is we remove the encumbrances. I don't know what your version says. Obstructions may be in there. Any other words in there?
What is that where it says in the sin that so easily entangles?
Okay, that's part of the obstructions, yeah. So what is he talking about there? What are some obstructions that we're to remove?
Things that distract us from living for God.
Okay.
Well, it's different for all of us, probably.
Isn't that right?
Yeah. What's difficult for one may not be difficult for another. And so it's anything that obstructs. So the word itself has, in an athletic context, has this idea of bulk. You're to remove the bulk that hinders you from running a race. It's talking about the training removes any non-necessary fat or unnecessary lack of lung function, or the training causes you to remove anything that causes you not to be the best you can be, right? And so he's using this athletic example to say you're to remove anything that hinders you from being the best you because of the gifts that you've been given by these people living the faith and seeing the faith. You're to honor that by being the best you could be and removing anything that hinders that. What else does it say?
Fix your eyes on Jesus.
Okay, yeah, we're to fix our eyes on Jesus. I'm going to come back to that, so hold on to that for just a minute. We're to run how?
With perseverance.
With perseverance, with endurance. And how do you, if you're an athlete, how do you build endurance or perseverance? You train. You push yourself, right? I can train all day long, and if I don't push myself beyond what I think I can do, I don't gain anything. I can't run further. If I want to run further, I have to run further than that. If I want to run a marathon, I don't run sprints all day, right? I've got to run so that I can run a marathon. And that idea, sometimes we need to make sure we understand that, because part of our living in a way that honors the legacy that we have, part of the way we live to be all that we can be spiritually, is to run with endurance or to push ourselves beyond what we think we can do. You're never going to mature spiritually if you only do what's easy for you to do. It may be, when I was younger, I was very shy. And I, at one point in time, said, well, I can't share my faith. I'm just shy. Right? Well, how did I get where I can share my faith? I went out and shared my faith. Right? It didn't just, whoa, all of a sudden it was there and I was bold. No, I committed to a witnessing program we had at our church where we went out every week and we went to follow up on visitors. We went to cold calls indoors. We did different types of evangelism. And it wasn't easy. It was scary. But that's the purpose of it. And this particular one I like, because you would be paired up. There'd be three of us, and one was a leader. And the leader would start off and say, y'all just come with me. And eventually, after a few weeks, it's, okay, your turn to knock on the door. Just knock on the door. After that, I got it. Somebody answers, I'll take over. Then it was, you knock on the door and make the introduction, and when it's right, I'll get into the gospel and share. And by the end, he would say, I'm just along for the ride. You guys do all the work. But that was part of that building to endurance, more than we thought we could do, and pushing ourselves. So it's the same in our faith. Many people live, they're spiritual babies. I don't care how many years they've gone to church. How many years ago they were saved, but they've never matured beyond infancy because they've never pushed themselves beyond infancy and trusted in the Lord to do it. So part of it is we understand the legacy we have, and that pushes us to endure and run the race. We get rid of all encumbrances or anything that would hinder us from being all that God calls us to be. Part of that is we run with endurance. We push ourselves. We're always challenging ourselves. Theologically, I like to read things from people I don't agree with. Now, a lot of people won't do that. I like to do that because it challenges me. Why don't I agree? I have a Quran in there. I have a Book of Mormon in my library. I've had people say, well, I would never read that. Why? If I have the truth, I don't fear lies. And so I've read them, and I don't fear reading them because I push myself to say I have truth, so I don't have to fear somebody telling me lies. And it's good training for me then to understand, to hear, and be able to correspond in a loving way with people. And so we push ourselves. And how do we, and another way we do that then is, Jan already kind of gave for us, is we fix our eyes on Jesus. What does that mean? Fix your eyes on Jesus. Remember, we're in a race illustration.
The end of the race, he's the end. That's to be with Jesus.
Right.
And we're looking towards that end, to being in heaven.
Has anybody ever seen Chariots of Fire, I believe it was, or was that the one where the guy from Scotland that would become a missionary later, I think that was it. It was about the English Olympic team. Well, there was this, not the Christian that was running, but he had a guy that was really fast. He was really talented. He got to the Olympics. He was blowing everybody away. He got to the Olympics, and he lost a race, and he lost his confidence. And they were going back, and they were reviewing the race. His coach was. And he said, look, you were neck and neck, and right at the line, you turned to see where your competition was. And that's when he passed. That's a great example of what this means. Our focus has to solely be on the tape, solely be on Jesus. And it doesn't matter what anybody to our left or right is doing. It doesn't matter what anybody says. It doesn't matter what any unbeliever does. It doesn't matter what any believer does. It doesn't matter what people think of you. Our focus is on Jesus, what's your call? My only focus is on you. And when I do that, then joy comes from being obedient. Yeah, go ahead.
It reminds me of my oldest son and my late husband used to be on volunteer ski patrol. And they would have their ski vest on that showed that they were volunteers, big red vest. And somebody that's out of control would fixate on the red vest. And so the ski patrol would be trying to avoid this person, and it was like a missile. They would finally just pause and just let them hit into them because they had their focus set on them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I remember driving to some small Texas. I think it was, where did Aunt Lucille and them live in Grandma Tab? Rockwall, when it was just a crossing of the road. Now it's a big town, but it used to just be a crossing. There was a Methodist church. There were 6 houses on each side. There was a store and gas station combination that they owned, I think. And then a few more houses on the other side. And that was Rockwall at that time.
Yeah, or part of Rockwall.
Or part of Rockwall.
Yeah.
But where they lived, where we were. And it would be dark and late, the little country roads. And I remember when I was probably the first time I was driving there, and it was dark and late. I remember my dad talking about, look, don't look at the lights of the oncoming car. If you look at them, you're going to have a tendency to veer toward them. You look straight ahead, and the car will stay straight ahead. And so I always remember that from that driving experience. And it's kind of the same way. You look straight ahead, and you'll continue the path that God has for you. And don't worry about the path God has for somebody else. What else does it mean? What else can we get from that? If our focus is on Jesus, what else are we getting out of that focus other than just there's the finish line? How about an example? If our focus is on, my example, I love studying and reading Paul, going through Acts and seeing Paul and how God used him. I love seeing Peter and his boldness and his stupidity sometimes. And that makes me feel better about myself a lot of times. These are all good people to study. Billy Graham was a great guy to look at and emulate to some extent. But the example that we have to keep before our eyes is how did Jesus do it? I mean, can you imagine being fully God and taking off that glory to put on flesh that you created, and then to allow your creation to not only reject you, to beat you, to make fun of you, and ultimately to kill you, knowing you could stop it at any time, and yet you find more joy in being obedient to the Father's plan than worry about what anybody else does to you.
It's a lot of love.
That's a lot of love. And we're told he did it joyfully. And so he's a good example for us. So he's not only the measure, but he's also the example. Let's continue reading, and let's read 4 through 11, I think.
You have not yet resisted unto blood, striving against sin, and you have forgotten the exhortation which speaketh unto you as unto children. My son, despise not thou the chastising of the Lord, nor faint when thou art rebuked of him. For whom the Lord loveth, he chastises, and scourges every sin whom he receiveth. If ye endure chastising, God dealeth with you as with sons. For what is a son whom the Father chastises not? But
You already read that.
But if ye be without chastisement, whereof all are partakers, when are ye bastards and not sons? Furthermore, we have fathers of our flesh which corrected us, and we gave them reverence. Shall we not much rather be in rejection unto the Father of spirits and live? For they verily for a few days chastise us at their own pleasure. But he for our profit, that we might be partakers of his holiness. Now no chastising for the present seemeth to be joyous, but grievous. Therefore afterward it yieldeth the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercising thereby.
Okay, so what is encouraging about the fact that God disciplines us? We're saying we find joy through his discipline. What's encouraging about that fact?
He loves us, shows care.
Okay, and how does he love us? What shows us that he loves us?
He rebukes, he disciplines us.
Okay.
It's like when we love our children, we correct their behavior because we love them enough to do that. Be so easy just if you didn't care, just to
Right.
blow it off.
Okay, so yeah, it means he loves us as children. But why is a parent's correction so necessary for children? Why does it show love of children? Think through that just a minute. First of all, think about that. First, it shows he knows we exist. He's not out there oblivious to whatever we're going through. I mean, how many times is the real temptation, the real endurance, God doesn't understand? You would never say that, okay? We're all been to church enough never to say that out loud, anyway. But in our heart of hearts, where are you, God? I cry out to you, where are you? And that's a way of saying, I'm not sure you know I exist. Do you know what's going on in my life? I can't do this because, don't you know? And he disciplines us. Why? First of all, because he does know. He does know we exist. He knows each and everything that we go through. He also knows our strengths and he knows our weaknesses and what we need. Our discipline isn't going to be the same because he really knows. He doesn't just know our situation, but he knows us. You know, I would never ever, I only had one child, but had thought through this before. I would never tell my children, you're all going to be disciplined the same. It sounds very fair. It sounds very equitable. But actually, it just shows you don't know your children at all. Because they're different. They need different things in their discipline. I'd much rather say, no, I discipline you this way because I know you. I know your strengths. I know what you're capable of. I know your weaknesses and where it's harder for you than somebody else. And therefore, my discipline takes all of that into account because my discipline isn't to make me feel better. My discipline is to make you better. And sometimes we lose that fact in discipline. You know, that's something I had to learn as a father. Never discipline when it was merely a reaction to my anger. That's not discipline. That's just abuse. Discipline when I had myself under control and I had thought through it and was able to say, this is wrong, here's why it is wrong, and here's what we're going to do to correct it because I love you and I want you to be all that you can be. I don't want you to be like this person, or I don't necessarily want you to be like that person, but I do want you to be all that you can be. The best version of you can be. And discipline is about pushing and guiding somebody to do that.
He knows what he has for us too. So if he has a certain task, then he'll want to prepare us for that road ahead, what we're going through.
Isn't that amazing how things that we may not like or understand that years later come back and go, oh, I'm sure glad I went through that. That really prepared me for this. And you're right. He doesn't only just know us, he knows our future. And so he disciplines us because he loves us, because he knows us, because he knows what we're capable of. He knows what he has planned and is in store for us. And so discipline, it says here, can be joy. All discipline for the moment seems not to be joyful, right? We can agree with that, but sorrowful. We don't like discipline. Nobody likes discipline. How many people loved doing 2-a-days in heat at football practice? We would do 3-a-days. I played tennis, and we'd do 3-a-days. You'd show up early in the morning just to run, and then you, during the school day, had practice. Then after school, you had practice. And nobody likes that, but it was for your own good so that you could throw off all the bad habits, all the endurance, all those things that would obstruct you from being the best you could be, and you endured it. And so it's just, it doesn't mean that it's happy times. It seems not like, but when does it become joyful? When do you recognize it as joyful?
And you have that self-discipline because you've learned.
Okay, yeah. When you've learned the lesson and you say, wow, that was good for me. And you have this joy of being what you are, or the best you can be. Maybe it's the joy of being the best at your position. Maybe it's the joy of being the best mother you can be. Maybe it's the joy of being the best employee you can be. But mostly it's the joy of being the best representative of Christ that you can be, whether that's in the workplace, whether it's in the home, whether it's in the neighborhood, or whether it's in the church. Doesn't really matter. The joy comes when, and the ultimate joy comes when. Now that's not in these scriptures, but if you think of scripture, can you think of one that shows the ultimate joy?
Before Christ.
Okay, before Christ, and what happens?
When he says, well done.
Exactly. Think about that. What kind of, you know all your failures, you know everything you've done wrong, and yet standing before the King of Kings, the creator of all, and he says, well done, good and faithful servant. Enter my joy. Right? That's the ultimate joy, the attaining of joy. And all the discipline we went through will be forgotten. And so discipline brings us joy because it produces in us what is necessary so that we can be all that God created us to be. All right, somebody read verses 12 and 13, and then we'll close it up.
Therefore strengthen the hands which hang down and the feeble knees, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be dislocated, but rather be healed.
Okay, he switches kind of here to, I think of physical therapy, you know? And so, in what sense is God's discipline like physical therapy?
It's kind of like what Paul says about buffeting his body in 1 Corinthians.
Mm-hmm.
So he keeps, it's kind of like he strictly disciplines his body and makes it his slave so that after he has preached to others, Paul himself would not be disqualified.
Okay.
For the prize. The prize
That's right.
being our salvation in Jesus Christ.
That's right. Okay. What other ways? Think of physical therapy, and then think of
Strengthen it.
okay, strengthening. Why do we do physical therapy? Why are they having pay to get up and walk twice a day? To
Right.
strengthen, right? Mm-hmm. And we're strengthened again. We're pushed beyond what we think we can do.
And in the Amplified, Paul mentions being strictly disciplined by hardships.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so the things that we're going through, they are strictly disciplined. God is a divine coach of some.
And it seems like it's something when it says severe hardships, what do you think of? Well, it's things that we think we may not be able to do. This is too hard. Man, dealing with this one person, God, you want me to have, I know you want me to love them.
Mm-hmm.
Man, they're too hard to love. They're unlovable. All throughout the New Testament, we're told to love the unlovable. And Jesus said, well, if you love somebody that's just like you, so what? What does that prove? Big deal. Now, if you love somebody that's unlovable, who treats you badly or who doesn't recognize it, or now there you go, there's something. Now you're starting to stretch yourself. Now you're starting to show what can happen when I'm the center of your life. And so, yeah, so in physical, we're to, the physical therapist or the discipline pushes us to be in the right direction and beyond what we think. The other thing I thought of, what does a physical therapist do while they're there?
Coach you,
Coaches you, all right?
encourages you.
Encourages you. What happens when you're doing physical therapy and being pushed? Do you sometimes fail?
You sweat.
You sweat, right? You know about physical therapy, right?
Oh, yeah.
Do you ever fall? The physical therapist is there to pick you up, to keep you safe as you fall. As you're taking that step you're not sure you can, and you can't right now, but the next time they make you do it, you're going to. The physical therapist is there to keep you safe. Think about that. God disciplines and he pushes us, but he's the ultimate physical therapist in that he keeps us safe as we're obedient and try that step we're not sure we can. And sometimes ultimately fail at it.
He catches us.
He catches us. And then what does he do? He puts us right up there and says, now take the step again. He doesn't say, oh, poor thing, I kept you safe, now go sit down. No, physical therapists don't do that. They say, do it again. You can do this. Do it again. And so I think there's the book came up with this reaction with physical therapy, and I think it's a great analogy because it reminds us that not only does he push us, direct us, guide us, encourage us, but he also keeps us safe.
He makes level those paths for our feet.
That's right.
And then that way the lame would not be disabled, but rather healed, like in verse 13.
That's right.
Similar to the same role of the physical therapist.
That's right.
In it.
That's right. And so joy, if we want to have joy in a world that seems, how can you have joy with everything going on? Oh my goodness. What a messed up world. And people, what messed up people. Nobody seems to care. They say things that were just incredibly stupid to each other. They talk out past each other. I mean, it's hard to get a conversation with anybody where there actually is a listening and a responding as opposed to a talking over. I mean, you can tell when you're talking to somebody and their mind is thinking about what they're going to say and they don't hear a word you say, right? That's not communication. And this world is hard because that's more and more of that we hear. More and more of making excuses. More and more of, well, if you do something that I don't like, then I should be able to respond to that in a negative, in a way you don't like. And so how do we have joy in this world? One, we think it focused on the gospel. Man, you know what? I deserve all this junk. How have I treated a holy God? What makes me think I'm beyond all that?
Who am I?
Who am I compared to God? Oh my goodness. Yeah, I deserve all this. Yes. But yet God loves me and has died for me. And so I stay focused on the gospel and I stay focused on learning and being encouraged and being pushed beyond what I think I can do, loving people that I don't think I can love, through the discipline of God. And that then brings joy. Maybe not happiness, but joy in understanding that God has put me here in this time, in this age, in this place with a purpose. And that should be joyful. that should be joyful. All right, any closing thoughts, comments?
No.
All righty. Wilson, you want to close us in prayer?
Father God, we thank you so much for bringing us together, and we do thank you that you're the giver of joy, and that you make straight the paths for our feet, and heal those areas of our life that we would rather probably keep lame. So, Father God, we do thank you for all that. Well, now we ask you to help us to focus our eyes on your Son and the prize, and not to worry about like that racer looking to the side and losing the race, because we do need to be focused on you, Father. And so we ask you to help us with that, and then help us to shine the light of Jesus so that others would want to know why we're happy, or why we have joy, not happiness, but joy. So, Father God, we just ask these things in your holy, precious name. Amen.
Yeah, let's quickly, I forgot to add the prayer requests.